Coming up on The Daily with me, Neil Patterson, 80 years on from the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp, I'm at the Imperial War Museum in London to explore why telling these stories of our past is so important today.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
It is Holocaust Memorial Day, 80 years, in fact, since Allied forces liberated the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp in Poland at the end of the Second World War. Since then, of course, Auschwitz has become synonymous with one of the darkest periods in human history. 1.1 million people were killed there, all part of the Nazi plan to annihilate the Jewish people. And of course, very obviously and very sadly, with every year that passes, there are fewer and fewer survivors alive to tell us their story. So today we've come down here to the Imperial War Museum in South London. I'm going to be having a look at their Holocaust exhibit and speaking to the historian responsible just a little later. One of the greatest resources that museums like this have are the first-hand accounts of the atrocities that took place and, of course, of the series of events that made the Holocaust possible in the first place. So let's hear from the living witnesses to the horror, those lucky few who managed to escape. And we've been speaking to a couple of them. We're going to start with Susan Polak. She was born in Hungary in 1930.
First of all, the eye did not exist after entry into Auschwitz. Since the entry into Auschwitz, a Hungarian-speaking person whispered, "Say that you are 15 years old." I wasn't 15 yet. Meaning that I might still be useful. And I just nodded. I didn't have a voice anymore. And somebody whispered to me, "Your mother will be gassed." What was the response from me? Nothing. How could I respond? How could I answer? And I was just hopeless. Every morning we were stripped of our clothes, what we had, hair shaven, appeared in front of Dr. Mengele, looking at our naked bodies, deciding, is she worth keeping? And on one occasion, he put me to the side, Mengele. I suppose I wasn't losing weight so rapidly. That might have been the reason, that she'll be able to do some work. People who lost weight very rapidly were sent to the gas chamber. You don't think that you live in a world which does those things. I accepted death. I wanted to die. I had no energy anymore. Where I was liberated was in Bergen-Belsen, and I couldn't walk. I could hardly talk, and I crawled out to die because, there were just mountains of corpses in Bergen-Belsen, mountains. And I felt a pair of hands lifting me up, a gentle pair of hands lifting me up. And he was a British soldier. He didn't explain anything because I wouldn't have understood anything anyway. I was liberated. I couldn't believe it.
Renee Salt is now 95. She was born in Poland and later held at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen.
They were both very bad, but I found Bergen-Belsen even worse than Auschwitz because it was so bad. You couldn't live there. You were brought there just to sit and wait to die. You got up in the morning and you just carried on the best you could. There was nothing to eat, nothing to drink. The water had been cut off already when I got to Bergen-Belsen. The the daily counting of the people stopped already because there was no point counting anyone. For every 1,000 people alive in the morning, there would only be 700 or 800 people alive in the afternoon. That's how quick people were dying. So there was no point counting anyone anymore. It was terrible. You saw the corpses. It was so frightening. You never know when your next minute was to die.
Our thanks to Renee and Susan. Coming up, the importance of not just remembering, but actually understanding the events that led to the murder of millions of Jewish people. I'll be speaking to the curator of the Imperial War Museum's Holocaust galleries.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Calnett.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, so that was pretty powerful. I've just left the Imperial War Museum's Holocaust galleries. We're in one of the exhibits close by. We thought, given the day, it was probably not appropriate for us to be recording in there. But what has struck me, I think, is not simply the way in which the museum has very clearly tried to, in that exhibit, personalise those who lost their lives. There are photos, there are personal possessions, there's audio recordings, all of which remind you that those who lost their lives were individuals. They weren't just part of some almost unfathomable 6 million dead. But I've got to say, it was when I was standing in front of the photos, the clothes, that my mind went to my Uncle Ernest, or as I later found out, my Uncle Ernst. I only found out after he died that he had escaped the German persecution of Jews like him in May 1939. He was only 10 when he and his mother made it to Scotland. I never got the chance to speak to him about it, and I suppose the way I'm feeling right now is regretful that I didn't get the chance to hear directly from him, the way the 10-year-old kid he was must have felt in what was then an unfamiliar place, what it felt like to know that you might not ever be going home. And I suppose the conversation that we would have had is exactly the sort of first-person account that the War Museum has used to such powerful effect, and of course which needs to be preserved. So let's speak to the historian responsible, Dr James Bulgin.
The thing about the Holocaust, which can be so difficult to contemplate, is that it's a history of the murder of millions of people. And what that means is that those millions can't speak for themselves. So we have to find ways to ensure that they're heard. And what objects do is offer a means of doing that. But not only that, they root it in a world which is kind of conceivable. I think the scale of the Holocaust can sometimes push it beyond the boundaries of the imagination. And when you see something which is material and real and present, and you're in the same space as it forces you to confront and contemplate the fact that these things really happened in the reality in which we exist.
That was my takeaway from the Holocaust gallery that we've just gone through, that for the first time I'm seeing things in front of me that were there, that were on someone's back. I mean, Otto's jacket, for example.
This jacket belonged to this 14-year-old boy who was living in Vienna and was sent to the UK on the kinder transport. But just before he left, his father, Isaac, took him to a men's outfitters and bought him this jacket 2 sizes too large. Now, of course, his father can't have had any idea about what was to come, but he was clearly just behaving in such a recognisably humanly way to say, I don't know when I'm going to see my boy again, and I just want to make sure he's got something to grow into just so he's warm. It's such a basic human instinct.
Tell us the thinking behind the Holocaust gallery itself. This felt incredibly different. It wasn't dark. It wasn't immediately oppressive.
One of the things which we really wanted to do from the outset was to be really clear about the fact there's no sense of inevitability to any of these things. Because we know where things eventually ended up. There can be a danger in assuming that things were always going to go in that direction. Whereas we wanted to be really clear about the fact that these things happened in our world, in the realities it's the same as ours, and that it was about people across the piece. This is a history that was done by people to people, and that's something which is so crucial to remember.
And it was incremental in its process, that in 1939, many Germans could not have conceived of where their nation would end up.
It continued to move through a series of thresholds. So it's not the case in 1939 that the route to Auschwitz was kind of hardwired. It moved to where it got to because a range of different individuals used their imagination and initiative and effort to get it there. But in order to get there, you need to move through a series of different thresholds that become kind of these moments of radicalization. It obviously starts in 1933 when the Nazis come to power, and it's preceded before that. But from the 1930s, when the Nazis come to power and they suggest that they've got the means of offering Germany a brighter future, it is expedient for them that there's a value from their purpose in blaming Jews for this. And as time goes on, they fixate on that more and more and more, because in order to define themselves, they find some use in othering Jewish people. The more that you can define who's not part of the central group, then the more that you can kind of create a sense of who is. So as we move through the 1930s, you see this kind of incremental growth in laws, policies, behaviours, attitudes that all start to lead in a certain direction. And then we get to the outbreak of war, and things change quite markedly. As soon as the Germans go into these new territories, they start to enact various different policies directed towards Europe's Jews. But in Poland specifically, in Nazi-occupied Poland, really quickly they established these ghettos. And ghettos can be quite forgotten in this history, but they're really crucial. That when they establish these ghettos, they do them in order to pull all Jewish people out of the wider population and to centralise them in certain places. And then after the invasion of the Soviet Union, they started to shoot Jewish people en masse, and the volumes of people who were shot grew and grew and grew to really hideously high numbers.
Just on the liberation itself, by any recognisable measure, that was a moment of significance for those who were in the camps, of course, but we're sitting in front of a screen at the moment showing images of the liberation of some of the camps. It was the first time I think that many people outside those camps would have had a comprehension of what was going on. Yeah,
so there was a knowledge, there was an awareness of what was happening, and that was pretty well established across, the media, and politicians discussed it, and there were various kind of lobby groups campaigning that something should be done. But nevertheless, you're absolutely right. What changed at the point of liberation is that it was visualized. For the first time, there were cameras there, and they were taking film and they were taking photographs, and being able to see things changes things. There's a difference between knowing and knowing. And I think that visualization had this critical function in terms of starting to create a sense of exactly what had happened here in a really kind of fully realized way.
What is then the importance? This is going to sound like a ridiculous question, but what is the importance of remembering in the way in which we do on moments of significance like the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz? What is the purpose in remembrance on occasions like this?
I think it forces us to engage with its kind of historical reality. I think that's the most important thing for me about these things. I think the reason that the Holocaust is so significant to us today is that it's proven that it's possible. We live in a society where it would be easy for us to sort of indulge the sense that somehow we would never be capable of doing these things. And what the Holocaust is a demonstration that Western culture and Western society is extraordinarily fragile. And all of us have within us, whether or not we like to admit it, the same frailties that the people back then did. I think it'd be really comforting to think that this is not something which, humanity is capable of. And so sometimes there's this temptation to sort of push the Holocaust to the sides of Western culture. One of the things we try to be really clear about is to say this didn't happen despite all of the things that we would consider that make it civilized. It happened because of them. All of those ways of thinking.
When it comes to the survivors, those that lived through this period, of which there is an ever dwindling number, what to them is the utility of sharing their story? I suspect many of them are very, very keen to share their story.
Yeah, from their perspective, obviously, that there's this really kind of understandable sense that they want to make sense of what's happened to them, and that obviously their most kind of profound ambition is that by talking about what they experienced and talking about what they saw, it will somehow galvanise humanity in behaving differently if similar circumstances were to occur again.
I wonder whether you agree with this, that sometimes when it comes to, anniversaries such as this one, that this is someone else's story, when in reality it is as much our story as it is those who survived.
This is very much a problem for the whole West to contemplate. The scope of the Holocaust expanded so far beyond this small group of people who are, often considered to be at the heart of it. The senior Nazis were integral to it, but there were so many people across Europe who were culpable in various different ways. And the ways in which they behaved and saw and thought is basically the same ways that we see and think. And I think that's something which we need to retain sight of.
I mean, do you see parallels between what happened in the 30s and 40s in Europe and elsewhere, of course, with what is going on right now? A rise in anti-Semitism is easily detectable right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a historian, you're looking to the way that the present responds to the past, and what we always say here is that it's not so much the case that the past repeats itself, but it certainly rhymes.
There is a degree of populism around the globe at the moment. I mean, I think what many people listening to this will struggle to think of is that there wasn't an inevitability to the Holocaust when Adolf Hitler took power in Germany, that there was a whole chain of events that led to it, and it could have been stopped. And I wonder whether, right now, we are in one of those earlier phases.
And the really horrible thing about that, and which the Holocaust demonstrates, is that sometimes we only see the clarity of those moments retrospectively. That is, of course, a question of monitoring what is happening elsewhere, but it's also a question of us asking ourselves some really difficult questions about the way that we think about things. Because I think if we're always assuming that the problem is elsewhere, we're never looking inside, and I think that's critical.
Anniversaries such as this serve as a reminder that the number of first-person accounts is dwindling and will soon be zero. From those you speak to, are they content? Are they happy with the way in which their memories are being used here at the Imperial War Museum?
My most profound experience, I would say, or certainly one of them when I was working on the galleries, was a meeting that I had with a lovely man called John Debye. He was a Hungarian survivor, and he'd asked me if he could come into the office for a chat. And I chatted to him about what we were going to do and our plans and our approach, etc. And then he stopped me in the middle of a sentence and he said, "James, I've heard enough. Thank you for your time. I'm very comfortable with what you said. I completely agree with your approach. Thank you for listening to me." And I said, "That's fine. If you need anything else, let me know." And then just as he was leaving the office, he turned around and he gripped my hand really tightly and he stared me directly in the eye and he said, "James, please just take care of our history." And then he left. And it's something that's really stuck with me because I thought, John was speaking for himself, but I think he was also representing a way of thinking, which I certainly heard from a number of other people, which was that this very clear sense that they can't be the bearers of this history. And that means it's incumbent on us to do it for them.
We can focus on those who were lucky enough to survive this process, but they are greatly outweighed by those who didn't.
Yeah, the terrible reality is that the Holocaust is a history of catastrophic annihilation, and the vast majority of people who encountered it in any form didn't survive and couldn't speak for themselves. And I think whilst the survivors have got a really critical role in creating a kind of human contact with this history, we can't forget the scale of the loss.
I mean, have we learnt the lessons of the Holocaust?
If the question is, have we found ways of kind of really interrogating ourselves and what we're capable of? Probably not. If we found a way of discussing those events and kind of retaining their visibility to a certain extent, yes. But the bottom line is that you don't need to look very far to see that humans have, not just now, but in the periods since the war, still proven themselves capable of behaving in despicable ways.
And that is your lot for this edition of The Daily from the Imperial War Museum. You can find out plenty more by heading to the museum itself, something I'd certainly recommend. You can also head to skynews.com. We're back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Calnett.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.